Mom barked mid-birthday cake bite, "Pack your bags, deadbeat out now." I paid $3,200 rent, all bills for 6 years. Dropped eviction papers on her plate. She screamed as sheriffs arrived. Now she begs on the streets. That sounds like a Lifetime movie summary, but I promise you, every single word is true. It was my 30th birthday, and the setting was the perfectly manicured backyard of the house. In a cruel twist of irony they wouldn't understand until it was too late, actually owned. We were in the heart of suburban Dallas, Texas, where image is everything, and the lawns are always freshly cut, even if the family relationships are toxic enough to burn the place down. The air was heavy, not just with the humid Texas heat, but with the cloying false cheer that always accompanied a Carter family gathering. I was sitting at the patio table nursing a lukewarm iced tea and trying to ignore the way my mother Eleanor kept fluttering around my older brother Michael as if he were the second coming and I was just the dusty coat check girl. My dad James was doing his usual routine, nodding sagely at Michael's every utterance and pointedly avoiding my gaze. I knew the script by heart. Michael, who had just failed to secure a second round of funding for his third disruptive app. This one, involving blockchain for dog walkers, was being celebrated for his resilience and entrepreneurial spirit. I, the one who worked 80-hour weeks as a high-level financial analyst and discreetly funded their entire lifestyle, was the perennial afterthought. Eleanor brought the cake out, a towering, aggressively floral arrangement from a local bakery that cost more than I spent on groceries that week. It was for my birthday, but the candle count and the saccharine song were really just an intermission for the main event, praising Michael. He stood next to me, accepting pats on the back from our 2 aunts and an uncle preening like a prize peacock. "Now, before Amelia blows out her candles," Eleanor announced, her voice hitting a frequency that demanded attention, "I just want to say how incredibly proud we are of all our children, but especially Michael. He's chasing the American dream. He knows the value of risk, and he's about to make us all very, very rich." She looked at me, then a quick dismissive glance before turning back to the fawning crowd. "Amelia, darling, you're the steady one, the stable one. We appreciate you sending us the rent every month, truly. We're getting by because of your generosity. But Michael, he's aiming for the stars." The subtext, loud enough for the entire block to hear, was clear. "You're just the ATM, Amelia. Michael is the legacy." I took a large bite of the ridiculously sweet vanilla cake. The sugar was an almost painful contrast to the cold, dead calm that settled over me. 6 years. 6 years of wiring $3,200 on the first of every month, covering the entire mortgage, property tax, insurance, and nearly all the utility bills for this oversized slice of Texan suburbia. 6 years of putting my own career track, the one that would have made me a partner at a Manhattan law firm by 28, on indefinite hold to play the dutiful, disposable daughter. It was right as I swallowed that my mother dropped the actual bombshell, and the casual cruelty of it was breathtaking. She didn't even look at me. She was still basking in the glow of the attention Michael was commanding. "Amelia!" Eleanor barked, her tone instantly shifting from performative Southern charm to ruthless corporate dictator. It was so sudden, so devoid of emotion that the entire table fell silent. "I need to talk to you. Pack your bags, deadbeat out now. Michael and Sarah are taking over the house next week. They need the space for Michael's new, very serious seed funding venture. You can find an apartment. You're stable, remember? You'll be fine." The word deadbeat hung in the air, a cruel, ugly accusation thrown at the person who had financially sustained their lives for half a decade. I could feel the blood pressure of the entire party spike. Michael, looking smug and triumphant, simply shrugged, confirming his complicity. James looked at his plate, the coward. "We decided," Eleanor continued, smoothing the fabric of her expensive silk dress, "that it's time Michael had the space he deserves. You've been here long enough. You were useful while the market was tough, but we don't need your rent anymore. Congratulations on your birthday. Now kindly vacate the premises by Friday." It was a public, vicious, deliberate act of humiliation designed to dismiss my existence and celebrate my replacement. They expected tears or perhaps a pathetic plea. They expected me to retreat, grab my things, and slink away knowing the entire extended family had witnessed my public execution. They expected me to remain the obedient passive ATM. But I wasn't that Amy anymore. The coldness I felt was not pain, it was the razor-sharp focus of an operation coming to its long-awaited conclusion. I slowly placed the small uneaten piece of cake back onto the plate. My movements were deliberately, almost theatrically calm. I took a sip of water and looked Eleanor dead in the eye. "Eleanor," I said, using her first name, a subtle act of defiance that made her flinch. "I paid $3,200 a month for 6 years. That's $230 $400. And I did it because, unlike Michael, I actually understand the concept of a financial commitment." I reached into the expensive leather briefcase I kept by my chair, a sleek practical accessory my mother had always mocked as unnecessarily masculine, and pulled out a thick stack of papers. They weren't just standard legal documents. They were stamped, signed, and certified by the Dallas County Clerk's Office. I didn't hand them to her. I leaned forward, raised my hand, and in a final, perfect act of deliberate, delicious disrespect, I dropped the entire stack of eviction papers right onto the middle of my birthday cake. The court seal stamped the frosting, the heavy weight of the legal documentation crushing the delicate floral swirls. Eleanor gasped, looking down at the sugary legal mess. Michael frowned, finally looking worried. James simply froze. "Those aren't my moving papers, Mom," I said, my voice low, clear, and carrying far further than Eleanor's shrill barks ever could. "Those are yours. And Dad's. And Michael's. Notice the date? The 90-day notice period expired at midnight. And notice the names. The plaintiffs are the holding company that owns this property, and the defendants are all 3 of you." Eleanor's face, usually expertly composed, began to drain of color. "What are you talking about? You pay the rent? It's our house." "No, Mom," I corrected her, shaking my head with a slow, pitying smile. "You pay me the rent. Or you did. 6 years ago, when you were facing foreclosure on this McMansion because Dad's investment scheme went belly up and Michael's first app tanked, I didn't lend you the money. I had my best friend Sarah Jenkins, who is, by the way, a high-powered real estate attorney in Chicago, set up a blind trust. That trust bought the mortgage note at a discount, paid off the bank, and then transferred the deed to my newly formed holding company, the Carter Family Trust, which, funny enough, only has one beneficiary, me, Amelia Carter. I paused, letting the full weight of the revelation sink in. The extended family, silent witnesses to the sudden brutal shift in power, were now staring wide-eyed. For the past 6 years, the $3,200 I sent you wasn't for groceries and bills. That was the monthly rent and lease option payment that you were making to me. You were my tenants, operating under a 6-year non-renewable lease agreement with an explicitly stated right to immediate eviction upon the first failure to renew or breach of contract. And since you just publicly terminated the arrangement and demanded I vacate the premises, a property that is legally mine, I'm simply enforcing the contract you decided to breach." Michael stepped forward, his face contorted in a mix of rage and disbelief. "You scheming little... You tricked us. You can't do this." "Oh, but I can," I countered, pulling out my phone and glancing at the screen. The clock showed 3:02 p.m. In Texas, once a lease is legally breached and the notice period is over, the execution is swift. I filed the writ of possession 3 days ago, and that, Eleanor, is the sound of the doorbell. The doorbell, loud and insistent, cut through the absolute silence. Eleanor's perfect composure shattered. Her eyes darted from the front door to my calm, knowing face. She let out a piercing, strangled scream, the kind of noise a wild animal makes when caught in a trap. "No, no, you can't," she shrieked, snatching up the eviction papers from the cake, smearing frosting all over the official stamps. "Game over, Mom," I said softly, standing up and retrieving my briefcase. "I was always paying the bills, but you thought I was a deadbeat. You threw shade at me one last time in front of everyone. I'm just giving you the last laugh you deserve." 2 Dallas County sheriffs, large and impeccably professional, walked into the backyard. One of them held up a piece of paper. "Amelia Carter, We have the writ of possession for 1420 Mockingbird Lane. We need the occupants to gather their essentials and vacate the premises within the hour. Any resistance will result in arrest. Eleanor opened her mouth to argue, but the sight of the badge and the stern faces of the officers rendered her speechless. Michael turning white as the frosting on the ground started to stammer. But the party. My reputation. Your reputation, Michael, I said, looking him up and down with the kind of disdain usually reserved for lint on my jacket, is the next thing that's going right after the house. I walked past them, giving the sheriff a courteous nod. Thank you, officers. I'll be waiting in my car for the property handover. As I stepped onto the driveway, the collective shock of the entire family reunion washed over me. I heard Eleanor's hysterical sobs and Michael's high-pitched yelling echoing behind me. They thought they'd won, but I was playing chess while they were playing checkers. That moment, the sight of the perfectly good birthday cake ruined by the weight of justice, was when my new life began. That moment changed everything, not just for them, but for me. The weight of 6 years of resentment, quiet suffering, and calculated financial maneuvering lifted off my shoulders the moment I heard Eleanor's first guttural, authentic scream of distress. It was the sound of the foundation of their toxic facade finally crumbling. As I slid into my black tinted-out SUV, a vehicle they also mocked as ostentatious, but which I paid cash for, I didn't feel triumph so much as an icy, profound sense of release. Justice wasn't sweet. It was meticulously documented and legally binding. The immediate aftermath was pure chaos, exactly as I had planned with Sarah Jenkins. Sarah, my former classmate from Yale Law and now my legal advisor and best friend, had helped me orchestrate this entire operation. She was the one who first suggested the strategy after I called her utterly heartbroken and furious 3 years ago. Don't lend them money, Amy. She'd advised, her voice crisp and professional even over the phone from her Chicago office. Acquire the asset. You control the house, you control the debt, and you control their future. Give them just enough rope and they'll hang themselves with it. My family's downfall was not my doing. It was the inevitable result of their own chronic, staggering entitlement. 6 years prior, I had been Amelia Carter, the rising star. I was only 24, but I was already a senior associate at Sterling & Black, one of the most prestigious investment banking firms in New York. I lived in a sleek, if small, apartment in Tribeca, wore power suits, and was on the fast track to making millions. My life was about IPOs, mergers, and the high-stakes game of Wall Street. Then came the call that yanked me back to the suburban hellscape of Dallas. My father, James, had leveraged their family home, a large but ultimately generic 4-bedroom, in an affluent but pretentious neighborhood, to invest heavily in Michael's first utterly doomed tech startup. When the startup went belly up, taking James's investment and retirement funds with it, the bank came calling. The house was in foreclosure. Eleanor was hysterical. James was catatonic. And Michael, of course, was already launching his second venture, completely oblivious to the trail of financial destruction he'd left behind. They didn't ask me for help. They demanded it, leveraging the classic American family guilt trip. We gave you everything, Amelia. A good upbringing, private school. Now it's time to pay us back. Your brother needs support, and we need a roof over our heads. I knew a loan wouldn't work. They were financially irresponsible and would never repay me. They'd just burn through the capital. But I couldn't stomach the idea of my elderly parents. They were in their late 50s, which felt ancient to my 24-year-old self, being homeless, even if they were terrible people. So I called Sarah. I need to save the house, but I need to own the asset, I explained to her. I need legal protection so they can never, ever use this house to fund Michael's next disaster, and they can't kick me out. Sarah's plan was brilliant and perfectly legal, using the opaque structure of American real estate and trust law. We created the blind holding company, the Carter Family Trust. The trust purchased the mortgage note for $450,000, a significant discount thanks to the distressed sale, and took possession of the deed. I resigned from my job, citing a family health crisis, packed my Tribeca life into storage, and moved back to Texas. I used a portion of my substantial savings from my banking career and smart early investments in Apple and Tesla to cover the initial outlay. The family's understanding was simple. I was moving back to Texas to take a lower-stress, high-paying job as a financial consultant. I would pay them $3,200 a month, an amount that conveniently matched the previous mortgage, property tax, and insurance payments as rent, to live in their basement apartment. They thought they were the landlords and I was the obedient daughter sending money home. But in reality, the $3,200 was the monthly lease option payment they were making to my trust. The lease, which they carelessly signed without reading, was drafted by Sarah to be aggressively in the landlord's favor. It stated clearly that the property was owned by the trust, they were tenants, and any breach of contract or attempt to sell the property would result in immediate termination and eviction. The language was dense, but James, who always signed Michael's business contracts without reading, simply skimmed it and told Eleanor, "It's just the lease agreement, dear. Nothing to worry about." My 6 years in that house were an exercise in emotional and financial endurance. I was constantly paying for their utilities, their car insurance, and the endless, small loans for Michael's business. I had to listen to Eleanor introduce me to their church friends as Amelia, who works from home now, while Michael was the visionary who will revolutionize the tech world. My career became a secondary pursuit. I worked remotely as a high-level consultant, often dealing with multi-million-dollar deals, but I kept my income deliberately vague. Oh, just some financial stuff. I'd demur, letting them assume I was doing glorified bookkeeping. This strategy was critical. If they knew how much money I was truly making, they would have bled me dry within a year. The only power I had was the illusion of stability combined with the reality of the monthly $3,200 check, the exact amount they needed to maintain their lifestyle. The atmosphere was unbearable, a low-grade constant of passive aggression. Michael would frequently borrow my expensive office equipment, laptops, monitors for his failed ventures and return them damaged. Eleanor would constantly drop thinly veiled insults about my lack of a romantic life, my heavy-handed professional attire, or my choice to drive a practical SUV instead of a flashy sports car like the one Michael constantly leased and totaled. "You're a lovely girl, Amelia," she'd say over Sunday potlucks, "but you need to smile more. You look like you're calculating capital gains taxes even when you're just making apple pie." The breaking point, the moment I transitioned from long-suffering daughter to cold, calculated avenger, came 8 months before the birthday party. I was preparing my annual tax filings, a massive, complex ordeal given my multi-state consulting practice, and needed to verify the property tax payment schedule. I logged into the county assessor's site with the property address which I had bookmarked years ago. That's when I saw the pending documents. James, thinking he was being clever, had quietly hired a local low-level real estate agent to list the property for sale by owner at an inflated price. The documents were the standard disclosures and preliminary title reports. He was trying to sell the house, my house, out from under me. The worst part was the timeline. They were trying to close the sale right after my birthday, when they knew I'd be distracted. Their plan, as confirmed by an email I intercepted from Michael to James, using a sophisticated forensic tool I'd learned during my banking days, was to take the equity, pay off the last tiny bit of debt they owed the trust, which was technically zero as they were the ones who owed me back rent, and then disappear to a cheaper state like Arizona, leaving me with a worthless lease and a massive legal headache. They were planning to commit fraud, essentially stealing the house, my $500,000 investment, and 6 years of my life, all to fund Michael's next venture, the dog blockchain. The fury I felt was not the hot, blinding kind. It was glacial. It was the absolute, total conviction that they had crossed a line and that kindness was no longer an option. It was time for justice in the sharp, merciless language of the American legal system. I immediately called Sarah Jenkins. "It's time to execute, Sarah. They're trying to sell. They breached the lease's non-transfer clause. I want the most comprehensive, immediate, and publicly humiliating eviction possible. I want them to lose everything, and I want them to lose it in front of the entire extended family." Sarah, who understood the assignment perfectly, was thrilled. "Consider it done, Amy. We'll file for the writ of possession immediately. We'll use your birthday as the perfect operational window, a little surprise party for your family." The next few months were a blur of cold, controlled action. I had already set up my consulting firm Vanguard Financial, which was thriving. I started discreetly buying up my own furniture, banking my savings, and creating an exit strategy. Under the guise of spring cleaning, I boxed up every piece of valuable property that was legitimately mine, from my grandmother's antique jewelry box, which Eleanor had tried to claim was hers, to my professional library and my custom ergonomic chair. I packed them all into a storage unit in Austin, preparing for my final move. I continued to act the part of the obedient, slightly downtrodden daughter. I still made the $3,200 deposit on the first of every month, establishing a perfect paper trail. I smiled weakly when Michael bragged about his impending success. I even suggested a large family BBQ for my birthday, knowing it would be the perfect stage. The week before the birthday, I had one last chilling conversation with James. I knew he was lying, but I needed it on record. I was sitting at a Starbucks, my earbuds secretly recording the call. "Dad?" I said innocently. "I saw the property tax assessment was updated. Are you guys thinking of doing any renovations?" He chuckled nervously. "Oh no, sweetie. Just keeping up with the neighborhood. Taxes in Texas, right? Just getting ready for the next year. It's hard to make that $3,200 stretch, but we manage thanks to you." "Good," I replied, my voice smooth as silk. "I worry about the place. It's such a valuable asset." "The most valuable," he agreed, completely missing the double meaning. "We'll leave it to you and Michael someday, of course." The lie was so easy for him, so practiced. That phone call, now an audio file titled James Lies, July 14th, 25, was the final nail in the coffin. It proved they were intentionally deceiving the person they believed was their tenant, benefactor, even as they were actively trying to defraud her. I sent the file directly to Sarah. "The evidence is overwhelming," Sarah texted back, complete with a celebratory martini emoji. "You messed with the wrong daughter, Amy. Writ of possession is confirmed for 3:00 p.m. on your birthday. Happy early birthday, my queen." The day of the party, I felt an almost surreal calm. It was a beautiful but hot Texas afternoon. I wore a perfectly tailored white sheath dress, a color I chose specifically to highlight the impending drama. I made small talk with Aunt Linda and Uncle David, both of whom had always been marginally kinder than my immediate family, but ultimately too scared of Eleanor to intervene in our dynamic. I even complimented Michael on his new ridiculously expensive designer t-shirt, likely paid for by my $3,200. I watched Eleanor glide around the room, the picture of the entitled suburban matriarch, and I realized how much I despised the entire structure of their lives, the performative wealth, the judgment, the crushing expectation of female self-sacrifice. They had banked on my love, my loyalty, and my financial competence, while giving me nothing but scorn and emotional neglect in return. And then came the cake, the toast, the word deadbeat, the eviction demand, and my moment. The moment to finally stand up for myself, not with an angry outburst, but with the cold, hard, unassailable truth of legal documents. As the sheriffs arrived and Eleanor's scream tore through the summer air, I finally allowed myself to feel the satisfaction. It wasn't revenge. It was the final, total reclamation of my life, my money, and my self-respect. I walked away from the chaos they created, my head held high, ready to pursue the life they had forced me to postpone. The next morning, I knew what I had to do: disappear completely, both physically and legally, from their sphere of influence. I drove straight from Dallas to Austin, the city I had secretly chosen as my new home and the launchpad for Vanguard Financial's headquarters. I didn't look back, but the radio news was enough to confirm the spectacular detonation I had engineered. The local Dallas-Fort Worth news stations, of course, didn't mention the names or the specific legal documents, but they ran a sensationalist segment on a dramatic eviction in an upscale neighborhood featuring blurry footage of a hysterical woman, Eleanor, being escorted off the property by deputies. The schadenfreude was almost palpable. I checked into a boutique hotel downtown overlooking the Colorado River and immediately called Sarah. "The execution was flawless, Commander," Sarah said, sounding utterly delighted. "Your mother threw a cake platter at one of the deputies, which resulted in a very brief, very justified detainment for disorderly conduct. They are officially out. Their belongings are in storage paid for by the trust for 30 days, and the locks have been changed. The property is secured, and we filed the final transfer of title this morning, securing your anonymity." "And Michael?" I asked. "Oh, Michael," Sarah sighed dramatically. "He's currently attempting to live-stream the injustice on Instagram, but his follower count is dropping faster than the stock market in 08. He's also trying to find a lawyer, but since we preemptively placed a lien on his last remaining asset, a leased SUV, no one will touch him without a retainer he doesn't have. He's officially broke and homeless." "Perfect," I said, feeling a satisfaction deeper than any financial bonus. "Now the next phase. I need you to handle the inevitable legal challenges and the social fallout. I want them to be met with an iron wall of documented truth." The legal battle, or rather the series of pathetic legal skirmishes they attempted, was entirely predictable. James and Michael hired a B-list lawyer in Dallas, a man named Gary, who clearly specialized in traffic violations and minor contract disputes. Their strategy was to claim I had committed elder abuse, financial coercion, and fraudulent misrepresentation of the lease agreement. The defense, orchestrated flawlessly by Sarah and her team, was a masterpiece of legal documentation. We presented the lease. The fully executed lease option agreement signed by James and Eleanor, clearly stating the ownership by the Carter Family Trust. The paper trail. 6 years of flawless bank transfers, all meticulously labeled monthly lease payment. The recorded lie. The audio recording of James denying the sale of the house, proving they were intentionally misleading the owner, me, while trying to commit fraud. The IRS filing. We proved that for 6 years they had claimed the $3,200 as rental income on their tax returns, thus acknowledging their landlord/tenant relationship. This was the final crushing blow. You can't claim rental income on an asset you claim to own. The IRS doesn't take kindly to that kind of ambiguity. The evidence was irrefutable. Gary the lawyer backed out, citing irreconcilable differences with his client's version of the truth. Within a month, the court ruled unequivocally in my favor, awarding me full possession of the property and ordering them to pay the trust's legal fees, which was of course an empty threat as they were penniless. While Sarah handled the legal end, I threw myself into building Vanguard Financial. I had delayed my dream of building my own high-powered consultancy for too long. My specialty was risk mitigation and asset restructuring for high-net-worth individuals and small to mid-cap tech firms, exactly the kind of clientele Austin, Texas was teeming with. I secured a stunning office space in a sleek new high-rise overlooking Lady Bird Lake. The decor was minimalist and powerful polished concrete floor-to-ceiling glass and not a single floral print or overly ornate piece of furniture, the complete antithesis of Eleanor's taste. I hired a small elite team of analysts and compliance officers, and within 6 months Vanguard was not just profitable, it was dominating the local market. I was finally using my intelligence and my financial prowess for my own benefit, not to subsidize their toxic entitlement. My social life changed too. I reconnected with friends who had been pushed away by my family's constant demands. Friends like David and Linda, my aunts and uncles who had witnessed the scene. They reached out not to condemn me but to praise my courage. Eleanor was always cruel, Amy, Aunt Linda confessed over a long overdue brunch in Austin. She was jealous of your intelligence. Michael was the only one who needed her, so he was the one she elevated. I didn't need validation, but it was nice to hear the truth acknowledged. I also started dating seriously, no longer willing to tolerate the emotional manipulation that had plagued my family relationships. I was dating a man named Ethan, a brilliant architect who saw my power and ambition not as something unnecessarily masculine, but as something beautiful and admirable. The final piece of my emotional recovery was confronting the enduring legend of Eleanor Carter. In the conservative suburban enclave they had ruled for decades, their fall from grace was the stuff of local legend. The house, which I immediately put on the market and sold for a healthy profit, was the physical symbol of their defeat. Michael, unable to get a real job, was last seen trying to hawk his business consulting services on LinkedIn, only to have his history of spectacular failures and the eviction drama brought up by former contacts. He had completely destroyed his professional reputation through his own carelessness and entitlement. James, unable to handle the financial ruin and the public shame, divorced himself emotionally from the situation, eventually moving in with a distant cousin in Florida, a quiet, humiliating retreat from the life he had built on lies and passive cruelty. But the most satisfying consequence, the one that perfectly closed the circle of injustice, was Eleanor. Sarah called me one afternoon, a hint of something dark and satisfied in her voice. "Amy, I just got an update from a source in Dallas. You're going to want to hear this." Eleanor, too proud to work a service job and too accustomed to her lifestyle to accept a legitimate descent into normalcy, was reduced to begging. She would loiter around the high-end retail districts of Highland Park, miles away from the neighborhood where she had reigned, specifically targeting the affluent women who drove the same European SUVs she used to drive. The visual was brutal and perfect. The perfectly coiffed middle-aged woman, once the queen of the suburbs, now holding a Starbucks cup, whispering pleas for bus fare, or a little help for a struggling mother. "She's literally begging on the streets, Amy," Sarah confirmed. "The same streets where she used to shop for her designer clothes and brag about Michael's imaginary success. The ultimate deadbeat." The irony was exquisite. The woman who had publicly called me a deadbeat in front of my entire family was now reduced to true destitution, begging for spare change. I had paid $3,200 a month for 6 years to keep a roof over their heads, only to be tossed out like trash. Now, without my silent, steady hand, the house of cards had collapsed completely. I drove to Dallas one last time, not to see her, but to sign the final papers for the sale of the house. As I drove through the familiar, oppressive neighborhood, I felt nothing but detachment. The house was just bricks and mortar. The power I had reclaimed was entirely within myself. As I sped down the highway heading back to my vibrant, successful self-made life in Austin, I finally allowed myself to truly smile. I wasn't just Amy the deadbeat anymore. I was Amelia Carter, CEO of Vanguard Financial, standing strong on my own 2 feet. I took my shot, rebuilt my life, and, in the most satisfying way possible, I had the last laugh. The road ahead was long, but finally, it was mine. The success of Vanguard Financial was not an accident. It was a deliberate act of construction fueled by 6 years of bottled-up frustration and my intrinsic drive. While the chaos of the eviction settled, I was in Austin, aggressively building my empire. I had learned early on in my investment banking days that the greatest leverage isn't raw power, it's impeccable documentation and the ability to find legal loopholes, or in my family's case, the ability to exploit their own negligence. My experience in New York, which Eleanor had dismissed as too stressful and unnecessary, had given me the exact tools to dismantle their entire existence without breaking a single law. I was playing chess while they were still playing Go Fish. The transition to life in Austin was liberating. It was a city that celebrated ambition, creativity, and technological innovation, the opposite of the stagnant, judgmental suburbia of my youth. I thrived in the open-plan office setting, the collaborative spirit, and the relentless pursuit of progress. My firm specialized in discrete, high-value asset protection for tech founders who were constantly under attack from venture capitalists or regulatory bodies. I was good at it because I understood the psychology of greed and entitlement so well. I'd grown up with a master class in it. I needed to fully process the emotional trauma of those 6 years, not just the financial betrayal. The cruelty was the wound. The money was just the suture. The core problem was my mother's lifelong favoritism towards Michael, who was perpetually needy, loud, and charmingly irresponsible. I was the responsible, quiet one, the one who didn't demand attention, and therefore the one who was ignored. This was a pattern that extended back to childhood. Thanksgiving dinners, where Michael's mediocre science fair project would be proudly displayed next to the apple pie, while my perfect report card was casually tossed onto the kitchen counter. I remember one particularly hurtful incident from my high school graduation. I had graduated at the top of my class, receiving acceptance letters from all the Ivy League schools. I was thrilled, having worked relentlessly. At the celebratory potluck, the kind where everyone brings a casserole and talks loudly about their children. Eleanor spent the entire evening gushing about Michael, who had just managed to pass his driver's test on the third try. He has such a challenging learning style, she cooed to the neighbors, and he overcame it. That's real strength. When Aunt Linda asked me about my college plans, Eleanor cut me off immediately. "Oh, Amelia's just fine. She'll do great. She's the steady one. Now let me show you the photos of Michael's first car. My academic success was my baseline. Michael's bare minimum achievement was a miracle." That night, I realized my role was the foundation upon which Michael's mediocre achievements were meant to shine. This deep-seated family dynamic was the engine that drove my revenge plan. When they called me back to Dallas, they didn't see me as a daughter. They saw a financial resource they were entitled to exploit. My legal maneuver, buying the house and becoming their secret landlord, was not just about saving the asset. It was about reversing the power dynamic. It was about making them financially beholden to the daughter they called a deadbeat. The tension in the house during those 6 years was thick enough to cut with a knife. I had voluntarily taken the smallest room, the one in the basement with the perpetually leaky plumbing, to maintain the fiction that I was merely a temporary guest. I worked remotely often, pulling all-nighters dealing with Tokyo or London markets, while Michael would loudly host his team meetings, which mostly involved playing video games and ordering $100 worth of pizza in the main living room, completely disrupting my workflow. When I complained, Eleanor would simply say, "He's networking, Amelia. It's vital for a CEO you can manage. You're stable." I discovered the attempted fraud 8 months out, but the final, undeniable proof came 4 months before the birthday party. I had been quietly monitoring Michael's business emails using a digital forensics tool. He was corresponding with an attorney about creating a new LLC to quickly move money once the house sale closed. In one email to James, he wrote, "The closing needs to be swift. I need that capital for the Series A. Don't worry about Amy. We'll cut her a check for her last rent payment and tell her we decided to sell. She's too busy with her boring job to notice the paperwork. She'll be fine. She's too much of a good girl to sue her own family." The use of "good girl" was the perfect insult. It confirmed they were banking on my ingrained sense of family loyalty and my history of self-sacrifice. It wasn't just a betrayal of finances. It was a psychological weaponization of my character. That email, now a printout highlighted in fluorescent pink, became Exhibit A in the eventual court filing. I had all the evidence I needed. The original deed, transfer the lease, the tax filings, the audio, and the email. The case was airtight. My friend Sarah Jenkins was my anchor and my secret weapon. She wasn't just a great lawyer, she was the only person who saw me Amelia and not Eleanor's stable daughter. We communicated almost daily using an encrypted messaging service, meticulously planning the logistics of the eviction. "The key is the element of surprise," Sarah reiterated during one of our weekly strategy sessions. "If they get wind of the writ, they'll try to file for an injunction based on undue hardship, which is a headache even if we win. We need to hit them when they least expect it, when they're distracted by their own hubris. Your birthday party is the ultimate distraction." I started making subtle preparations. I emptied my personal safe deposit box. I changed my main bank accounts to a national firm with no local Texas branches. I even went so far as to start ordering my groceries from a niche organic delivery service, anything to avoid running into my family at the local Target. The physical act of preparing to leave was also an emotional separation, a slow, deliberate cutting of the cord. The psychological toll of living under the same roof as your perpetrators, knowing you are holding the power but having to pretend you are helpless, was immense. There were nights I couldn't sleep staring at the damp ceiling of the basement room, fantasizing about that moment. I imagined slamming the evidence on the table, yelling, screaming, demanding justice. But I always pulled myself back. The goal was not catharsis. The goal was complete, total, irreversible victory through legality. Emotion was weakness. Control was power. My decision to drop the eviction papers onto the cake was a last-minute flourish, a moment of pure cinematic justice. The cake symbolized the false front of our perfect family life, sweet, expensive, and utterly superficial. Crushing it with the weight of the court's judgment was the perfect symbol of their shattered reality. The sheer shock on Eleanor's face when the sheriffs arrived remains the most satisfying memory of my adult life. She wasn't just surprised. She was professionally offended that her carefully curated social event had been ruined by the vulgar intrusion of the law. Her scream was not one of fear but of righteous indignation that the universe and her daughter had dared to defy her perfect narrative. Michael's reaction was equally telling. He immediately switched from triumphant heir to furious victim, trying to argue with the deputies about his rights and the injustice of being forced to vacate. He wasn't worried about his parents. He was worried about losing access to the family asset he felt entitled to. "We need a lawyer!" Michael shouted at James right in front of the horrified neighbors who had quietly migrated to the driveway. "Dad, call our lawyer, get this sorted out." "He's right here, Michael," I said, pointing to the documents now covered in vanilla frosting. "I'm the only lawyer you need to worry about." I stood on the curb watching the deputies efficiently carry out their duty. They allowed Eleanor and James to quickly grab their medications, phones, and essential clothing. The rest of their belongings were systematically tagged and placed in a moving van heading to the storage unit Sarah had rented for them. Eleanor attempted to stage a dramatic protest, collapsing onto the lawn, but the deputies handled it with the cold, practiced indifference of civil servants who had seen it all. As the moving truck pulled away, I approached the lead deputy. "Everything is handled," I confirmed, handing him a clean-sealed envelope. "This is the deed and the key transfer document. The property is now fully secured by the Carter Family Trust." I then called a locksmith I had hired days ago who arrived moments later to change all the locks, including the gate codes. The house, which had been a symbol of my imprisonment, was now sealed off a fortress of legal victory. I drove away that evening, not heading to a celebration, but to a quiet, meditative dinner with Sarah in Austin. She had flown in to ensure the final legal documents were processed at the Texas state level. "To the last laugh," Sarah toasted, raising a glass of expensive Napa Valley Cabernet. "To legal documentation," I countered, clinking her glass. "And to never ever confusing family obligation with self-respect." The move to Austin was more than a change of address. It was a massive career and psychological shift. I launched Vanguard Financial with a starting capital of $5 million of my own money, plus the profit from the rapid sale of the Dallas house, which had netted me an additional $150,000 after all legal fees. I didn't need the money, but the sheer principle of recouping my investment and getting a return was everything. I specialized in a niche that my former firm had considered too boutique: the legal and financial structuring of exit strategies for founders in high burn rate tech sectors. I offered them an ironclad plan for financial survival that their venture capitalists never would. My clients loved my sharp, no-nonsense approach and my ability to foresee disaster, a skill honed by 6 years of watching Michael's spectacular failures. The speed of my success was intoxicating. Within a year, Vanguard was recognized as one of Austin's fastest-growing firms. I was giving keynote speeches at tech conferences, wearing the sleek, powerful clothes I loved and commanding respect. Every success was a silent middle finger to Eleanor's constant criticism of my unnecessarily masculine ambition. I had swapped the claustrophobic air of family betrayal for the clean electric energy of self-made success. But the real drama, the long-term satisfying consequence of my revenge, was watching my family try to rebuild their lives without their financial crutch. Michael, convinced that the eviction was an illegal act, spent the first few months trying to organize a class action lawsuit against me, only to find that no credible lawyer would take his case. He was reduced to couch surfing with former frat brothers still trying to pitch his ill-conceived dog blockchain app, but his credibility was shot. When investors Googled his name, the first thing that popped up was the local news story of the dramatic eviction, often paired with the blurry picture of his mother being helped off the lawn. His entire public persona, which Eleanor had worked so hard to cultivate, was tainted. He was the perpetual failure, no longer protected by the illusion of wealth. James, the passive enabler, was hit hardest by the social shame. He lost his part-time advisory position at a local firm because his financial incompetence and complicity in the attempted fraud became known. He was too cowardly to reach out to me, sending only one pathetic, cryptic text message that simply read, "What did we do to deserve this?" I blocked the number immediately. They didn't deserve it. They earned it. Eleanor, however, was the spectacular collapse I had predicted. Too proud to take a minimum wage job, too entitled to accept that her lifestyle was gone, she refused to adjust. She quickly burned through the meager savings James had tucked away. The 30 days of paid storage ran out, and all their belongings, the expensive furniture, the gaudy decor, the years of accumulated possessions, were auctioned off to pay the storage fees. The reports of her begging started filtering through the social network months later. Aunt Linda, my only remaining connection to that side of the family, sent me a discreet text message accompanied by a picture taken from a distance. It was Eleanor standing outside a high-end department store in a neighborhood called Westlake, the kind of place where she used to buy her designer scarves. She was wearing clothes that were clean but clearly rumpled, holding a coffee cup and speaking to a woman in a huge black SUV. The image was a perfect reflection of the viral title, "Now She Begs on the Streets." The profound satisfaction came not from seeing her suffer, but from seeing her experience the consequence of her own value system. She had valued image entitlement and cruelty over family and honesty. Now she was left with nothing but her image, the image of a beggar. I didn't contact her. I didn't intervene. I didn't send a secret donation. Justice was not about charity. It was about the natural, unimpeded result of her actions. I was no longer the steady ATM daughter. I was the architect of my own life, and the life I had built was too rich, too demanding, and too fulfilling to allow the toxic debris of my past to contaminate it. One evening, I was on a date with Ethan, sitting at a rooftop bar in downtown Austin, looking out over the glittering cityscape. We were talking about a major deal I had just closed, a $50 million restructuring. "It's incredible, Amy," Ethan said gently, taking my hand. "You've built all this in under 2 years. You're a force of nature." I smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached my eyes. "I just needed a massive public betrayal to finally cut the cord, Ethan. Sometimes the most toxic people in your life are the ones who hold the key to your greatest success. They push you so far that you realize the only person you have to protect is yourself." I thought of the cake, the papers, the sheriff's uniform, and the perfect frozen moment of Eleanor's scream. It was my rebirth, my American dream realized, not through inherited wealth or passive stability, but through hard-won intelligence, legal precision, and the courage to take the last devastating shot. I had lost 6 years, but I had gained a lifetime of freedom and self-respect. The story was not over. It was just finally, triumphantly beginning. I lifted my glass, toasting the shimmering lights of Austin, a city of my own, making a future I would never allow anyone else to define. The final chapter of that family drama unfolded not in a courtroom or on a street corner, but in the subtle, pervasive sphere of social perception. In the Dallas social circle my mother had so desperately clung to, the narrative shifted from Eleanor's initial self-pitying tale of the ungrateful, cold-hearted daughter to the stark, undeniable truth. The sale of the house, the public records of the trust, and the quiet, persistent rumors of Michael's financial recklessness finally crystallized into a singular, unfavorable consensus: the Carters were frauds. They had lost their house not to a vengeful daughter, but to their own staggering entitlement and dishonesty. This social and reputational collapse was the true lingering consequence of my revenge. It was the public erasure of their carefully constructed narrative. I made a deliberate choice to remain silent about the incident, never giving an interview, never posting a cryptic message on social media. My silence was my greatest weapon, allowing the irrefutable court documents and the visible destitution of my family to speak for themselves. In the age of constant oversharing, my reserve commanded a different kind of respect. It proved that my actions were not motivated by petty spite but by a cold surgical quest for justice and self-preservation. 2 years after the eviction, I was well and truly settled into my life as Amelia Carter, the successful entrepreneur. Vanguard Financial was now operating out of a larger office, and I had expanded my clientele to include firms in Silicon Valley and Boston. My reputation was solid, built on integrity and ruthless efficiency. My relationship with Ethan had deepened significantly. He was an architect, a builder of physical structures, and he appreciated that I was building a solid financial structure for my life. He knew the entire story, having been patiently filled in by Sarah and me over a marathon weekend in Napa Valley, a trip I finally took guilt-free, enjoying the vineyards and the exquisite food that felt like a world away from Eleanor's judgmental potlucks. "You never talk about the 6 years, not really," Ethan noted one night while we were relaxing after a massive Thanksgiving dinner we hosted for Sarah and a few other close friends, a Thanksgiving free of mandatory suffocating family drama. "There's nothing to talk about?" I replied, tracing the rim of my wine glass. "It was an investment that went sour, and I corrected the mistake. I view it like a failed merger. You write off the loss, you learn the lesson, and you execute a new acquisition strategy." But Ethan, bless him, knew me better than that. "You're not a robot, Amy. That was 6 years of your life spent playing the dutiful daughter for people who saw you as a debit line. That's a trauma you have to acknowledge." He was right. The deepest wound wasn't the money. It was the sheer casual cruelty of the moment Eleanor called me a deadbeat. It stripped away all my sacrifices, all my hard work, and reduced me to a derogatory title. I realized that my revenge wasn't just about the house. It was about forcing them to live out that title themselves. I finally sought professional help, talking to a therapist in Austin who specialized in family trauma. She helped me reframe the experience. "You didn't ruin their lives, Amelia," she explained softly during one session. "You simply removed the safety net you provided, allowing the natural gravity of their own choices and entitlement to take over. You were the only thing preventing their collapse. When you left, the inevitable happened." This reframing was profoundly healing. It meant I wasn't the villain. I was the catalyst for truth. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place during a quiet conversation with Aunt Linda. Linda, who was genuinely a kind soul, called me one day to say goodbye. She and Uncle David were moving to Arizona for David's health. "Before I go, Amy, I just want to tell you something about your mother," Linda confessed, her voice thick with emotion. "I saw her the other day. She was still hanging around the Westlake area. I pulled over and offered her a meal. She was proud, tried to deny she needed help, but she was starving. She asked me if I'd seen Michael. She still thinks he's going to invent the next Apple and rescue her." Linda sighed. "But the thing she said, the thing that broke my heart, was about you. She said, 'I told Amelia she was stable. Why couldn't she just stay stable? Why did she have to be so smart? If she had just been a little dumber, she would have kept giving us the money.'" I hung up the phone and laughed, a hard, genuine burst of laughter. That was the core of it. My intelligence was my ultimate sin. They preferred the illusion of Michael's potential to the reality of my competence. My mother's entire tragedy was rooted in her preference for the helpless, dependent son over the capable, independent daughter. My revenge was simply proving that my smartness was a force they could never defeat, only suffer from. I took the profit from the house sale and invested it into a philanthropic venture, a scholarship fund for young women pursuing degrees in finance and law, particularly those from disadvantaged backgrounds or those who were the first in their family to pursue higher education. I called it the Vanguard Legacy Fund. It was a final symbolic act, taking the money they had tried to steal and turning it into a structure that would empower the next generation of women to be, in my mother's terms, too smart for their own good. 2 years later, I stood on the stage at a massive, successful financial summit in Chicago, giving the closing keynote address. I spoke not about financial models or market fluctuations, but about the true cost of moral hazard and the necessity of personal risk mitigation. I spoke about building ironclad defense mechanisms, both financial and emotional, against the inevitable betrayal. I never mentioned my family by name, but when I spoke the final line, my eyes met Sarah's in the front row, and I knew she understood. The greatest asset you will ever own, I concluded, the spotlight bright on my face, is not your home, your car, or your stock portfolio. It is your sovereignty, your independence. And when toxic people try to take that from you, you don't fight fire with fire. You fight entitlement with legality, and you meet cruelty with the cold, unassailable truth of documented fact. I walked off the stage to a standing ovation, the sound of applause feeling like the perfect satisfying counterpoint to the distant echo of a long-ago hysterical scream. I was Amelia Carter, strong, intelligent, and free. I had not just survived the betrayal, I had weaponized it, using it to forge the life I was meant to live. The long, hard drive on the path of my own Route 66 had ended in a spectacular, glittering city of my own design. I had earned the last laugh, and it was worth every single cent.